So the New York Times released a list of the 100 best books of the 21st century so far, which was selected by critics. At the end of that list, readers had the option to submit their 10 books that they think should be included on the list of the 100 best books of the 21st century so far, and the New York Times has now compiled them. So this is the list, and I thought I would run through them, and I'm going to make a note of how many books I've read and how many books I want to read. You can play along at home. I'm hoping that I've read a fair few of them. As someone who has kind of committed my life to reading and books, because I think that the main thing that struck me and struck a lot of people when they saw the critics list is, God, I have not read a lot of these. Whereas this list has been contributed to by a lot more people and reflects a much broader array of interests. So let's have a look. When the Book Review published a list of the 100 best books of the century, we knew we'd hear from readers who were incensed or gutted or driven wild by grief. How could so-and-so's book not make the cut? I mean, call me out. That is very much how I felt. So anyway, one of the best things about working in books is just this, the passion of our constituency. No way would we deprive readers of the chance to vote for their own list and make their voices heard. And so you have. There's some overlap between your list and ours. We agreed on 39 books. As for the 61 news stories here, what stands out most is that they're the books that captured cultural moments and sparked lively literary conversations. They're also great. Enjoy. So I've scrolled right to the bottom. We're going to go from 100 to 1, and I'm going to be keeping track of how many of these I've read. You can play along at home. You can also comment how many you've read and how many you want to read. And without further ado, let's go for it. At number 100, we have A Man Called Ove by Fredrik Backman, translated by Henning Koch. This one is a tearjerker. I have read it. I was really surprised not to see a Fredrik Backman book on the previous list because his books are so moving, resonate with so many people. This is such an easy one to recommend to people because everyone I've recommended this book to has loved it. Next, we have Empire of Pain. This is by Patrick Radden Keefe. I have not read this. I think this is the same author as Say Nothing, right? It is. Okay, so this was the choice for the Dua Lipa book club last month. So I made a video about Say Nothing. I have a copy, but I've not yet got around to reading it. But Empire of Pain, I have not read either. Shuggie Bain, one of, in my opinion, the best books ever. It was on my list of modern classics. I think you could study this in school. It's about addiction, motherhood, growing up, coming of age, etc. I think it's one for the ages. I think it's going to last the test of time. And it was kind of outrageous that there was no Douglas Stewart book. I know they're recent, but I do think that Douglas Stewart is writing incredible work that deserves its flowers. And I'm glad it's getting it here. So Shuggie Bain, I have read. My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otesha Moshfegh, I have read. This is quite a controversial one. I know people have big opinions on this book about depression and also a major event in American history. I feel like it's a spoiler to say which one, so I will not. I went to a talk once that Otesha Moshfegh was running, and she loves chaos. She was like stirring the pot. Every time someone said anything vaguely controversial, she was like, say more about that. I kind of love that energy from her. I also recently watched the movie adaptation of Eileen with Anne Hathaway. And I would like to read that book too. You know, after seeing the film, I would be intrigued to read the book. I think I've only read one of hers, but I would be up for reading more. The next one is The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett, another Dua Lipa book club pick randomly. But I love that book. It was in my best books of 2020 or 2021 video. So I have read that one. It is inspired by Nella Larson's book Passing, and it's about two siblings who could pass as white, but one chooses to live her life as a white woman and one chooses to live her life as a black woman. So we see how their lives kind of diverge from that point. We also follow their children. A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. Of course, this was a major omission on the main list, on the original list, I should say. I have read it. So far, 5 out of 6 is pretty good going, but one of the most important books ever. Set in Afghanistan. So good, so heartfelt. The Bee Sting! Yes! Okay, so I actually did submit a ballot for the critics' choice, and I put The Bee Sting on my list. That's number 6 out of 7 so far on my list. I love this book. I think it's really important, the way it talks about the climate crisis, the way it talks about perception and the truth, and it's a family saga set in Ireland. I think this book is so special. It was shortlisted for last year's Booker Prize and has kind of been the fan favourite. It didn't win the prize, Prophet Song did, but I think this has been the one that's resonated with so many people. The next one is Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. I have not yet read this. Is this the one about the octopus? Yeah, an exploration of friendship, reckoning, and hope, tracing a widow's unlikely connection with a giant Pacific octopus. I'm going to put this on books I want to read because I'm very, very intrigued by this one. Next, Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. Of course, there had to be an Olga book on here. She won the Nobel Prize for Literature. She writes incredible works. She's the author of Flights, The Book of Jacob. This is the only one of hers that I've read, but I really, really want to read more, and I'm buzzing because that's an extra tick on my list. And Project Hail Mary, yes. Oh, I'm really pleased to see this book being celebrated. This is a sci-fi book. It's by the same guy who wrote The Martian, Andy Weir. This is just so amazing, and there's this like alien robot life form thing that had me crying. The audiobook is especially good for this. I really, really highly recommend it. There is science involved, but it's very accessible, and it is so compelling. The pages basically turn themselves. So out of the first 10, I've read 8. So 80% is a pretty good stat. I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep that up, but I want that on the record for right now. In the Dream House was also one of my submissions. So that is the 9th book on this list that I've read. Yeah, I think In the Dream House is one of the best pieces of, it's kind of a hybrid between memoir and fiction. It's about an abusive relationship, but it's very, very literary in the way that it's written, gorgeously descriptive. I love this book. The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls, I have not yet read. The Plot Against America by Philip Roth, I also haven't read. This was number 65 on the book reviews list. Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. I'm pretty sure this was on my ballot, and that takes me up to 10 that I've read. Yeah, this is an amazing exploration of womanhood, femininity across the generations, across the ages, and in its myriad forms. I think it's a really, really special and important book. Bernardine Evaristo, winner of the Booker Prize. She shared the prize with Margaret Atwood and The Testaments. So even the book itself has this kind of interesting story about how it was celebrated and awarded. And also this was Bernardine Evaristo's like 8th novel, and she hadn't really seen that much like commercial success, and this was the book that kind of thrust her back into the public eye, and people started to pick up her other works too, which is really exciting to see an author have that legacy. Life of Pi, a classic. I have read this. I think it lost me a little bit in like the final third, but I do think it's a great book. Of course, I'm sure a lot of you have read this or at least seen the movie adaptation of this book. Next, we have When Breath Becomes Air. I have read this. This is a memoir about a doctor who is dying, and the book is finished by his wife. It's really, really special. Very, very emotional. 10th of December by George Saunders. I haven't read. I have this book on my shelf, A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, which is George Saunders' kind of guide to writing, which I'm intrigued by. He also wrote Lincoln in the Bardo. Probably would expect to see that on this list as well. And this book, 10th of December, was number 54 on the book reviews list. I'm going to add that as a book I want to read because I do really want to read George Saunders. Because I think he's kind of heralded as someone who is an expert on how to craft the perfect book, the perfect story, and as someone who is aspiring to be a writer, that is very important to me. Next, we have Let the Great World Spin by Colin McCann. I actually have to hold my hands up and say I have not heard of that book. Tom Lake by Anne Patchett. Again, Anne Patchett is heralded as a kind of, I mean, she is the definition of a literary luminary. Like, people really talk about her as a leader in craft. I think I also have her book somewhere behind me as well about the craft of writing, but I don't remember the name and I also don't see it, but I definitely know I have it. So anyway, this is a really working system behind me of my books. The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Then in at 80 we have Deacon King Kong by James McBride. Okay, my list has started to falter a little bit. That was not a good stretch of 10 for me in terms of books I've read, but IQ84 Murakami. Now, I was really surprised not to see any Murakami on the original list. This is one that is absolutely on my bucket list of books I need to read. It's so long. A lot of places that sell it will sell it in 3 separate volumes because it's just so large. But I love Murakami's writing. Oh, Kafka on the Shore. He's also in at 78. Now, this one I have read. Norwegian Wood was my gateway drug into Murakami, but Kafka on the Shore is my absolute favorite. Magical realism, fish fall from the sky, cats can talk. It's bizarre but so good. Then we have Sapiens. I have read that. Such classic that you'll find on, I feel like, most people's bookshelves. And then Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson in at 76. At 75 is The Lincoln Highway by Amor Towles. I haven't read this book yet, but I have met Amor and he was an absolute legend, so I'm really excited to see him getting his flowers and being celebrated. I'm putting this on my list of books I really want to read because I love the way that Amor Towles uses history as a kind of backdrop for his books and then explores the humans in the foreground. Next we have Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. That's a really interesting choice. Would I have put it on the top 100 books of the century so far? Probably not, but I did think it was a really interesting book. I have read that. That takes me up to 15. What I found really interesting about this book was its cubist elements. It's really interesting. I think you could write a whole essay on the cubism in Clara and the Sun. Maybe one day I will. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Ooh, that's interesting. I'm wondering if there'll be any other Harry Potter books on this list. I think my favourite is probably Goblet of Fire, I think. I just enjoyed that kind of side quest of the games. Maybe it's just because the Olympics is on at the moment. It's kind of fresh in my brain that I want to read stuff about games and competitions. The Deathly Hallows is, of course. I think that maybe we have the way that we remember the Deathly Hallows being a bit skewed because it was turned into 2 movies, whereas, of course, it was 1 book. So, yeah, valid. Fair enough. That takes me up to 16. And of course, it was shocking not to see any Harry Potter books on that original list. I think that recent events probably skewed it a little bit, and people didn't want to vote for this. Also, there was a lack of children's books anyway. But I do think, regardless of anything, a Harry Potter book deserved to be celebrated on that list. We next have Crying in H Mart at number 72. I have read this, one of the best memoirs about dealing with grief. It's about how her mother died and never really would say the words "I love you," but would show her love through acts of service, like cooking, and how her love was kind of cooked into every meal that she would prepare. And Michelle Zauner goes back to H Mart and is kind of looking around at all of the groceries that her mum used to buy, and that's her way of reconnecting with her mum. In at 71, we have Sing, Unburied Sing, which was number 30 on the book reviews list. I haven't read this one, but I do have a copy of Let Us Descend by Jesmyn Ward, which is her most recent book. We have Know My Name by Chanel Miller, another really, really powerful and important memoir. I have read this. This is about Chanel Miller's experience being the victim of a sexual assault at Stanford University and the kind of public response to it. She was anonymous for a long time, and this book is her kind of reclaiming her own story. She's saying, this is my story, you will know my name now, and I think that's really, really powerful. Killers of the Flower Moon, interesting, David Grann. I have not read that, and I have not seen the movie either. The Devil in the White City by Eric Larson. Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. Yes! This was also one of my submissions. So far, a lot of my submissions have made this list, but they did not find their way onto the critics list, and we're at 67. Next we have Just Kids by Patti Smith. I'm always so intrigued by how venerated this book is. I controversially don't necessarily believe it's the 66th best book of all time, well, of the century so far, but it is worth the read. I will say that it's a worthy read, but I think that there's a lot of name dropping and a lot of sections that aren't that interesting, but that's just me. I still liked it. I think it's like a 3.5-star book, which is good. That is good. That's like above average. So anyway, please don't come for me, Patti Smith lovers. Evicted by Matthew Desmond was number 27 on the book reviews list, but makes it to 65 on this one. I have not yet read that book. 2666. This was in the top 10, right? Yeah, it was number 6 on the book reviews list. This is by Roberto Bolaño and translated by Natasha Wimmer. I would like to read this purely because it was in the top 10, and I see it everywhere. I don't know anything about this book. In fact, let's Google it. It feels like something I definitely should know about, but I just don't. 2666 is the last novel by Robert Bolaño. It was released in 2004 as a posthumous novel, a year after Bolaño's death. It's over 1,100 pages long in its original Spanish format and divided into 5 parts. Okay, but what is it about? The novel revolves around an elusive German author and the unsolved and ongoing murders of women in Santa Teresa, a violent city inspired by Ciudad Juarez and female homicides occurring there. Okay, so yeah, that is definitely on my list. So far, there have been 5 books that I would really, really like to read. I'm gonna have to go back through and write down which ones they were, or watch this back as I edit it and write them down, because I realised I forgot to do that. And this tally is pretty useless when I go into a bookstore, so that was dumb. If only there was some record of this happening. If only this was on camera. The 5th season is in at 63. The Sympathizer is in at 62. I have not read this book, but I am watching the TV series currently, and it's very, very good, and it's making me want to read the book, so that is going onto my list of books I want to read. Next we have North Woods by Daniel Mason, The Dutch House, again by Ann Patchett, another entry for Anne, Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. I bought a copy of this book, I intended to read it, and then my comment section was so split with people saying they loved it and people saying they hated it that I've almost been a bit intimidated about reading it, because I know that whatever opinion I have on this book, I will be wrong. I mean, half of you are going to disagree with me no matter what. You know what? Sometimes I got to protect my peace. But I did go and see the movie. I thought it was okay. I was invited to the premiere, so I went to see it. And that's that on that. White Teeth by Zadie Smith. I've lost my pencil. How did that happen? Oh, it's here. It got away from me somehow. That one I have read. That takes me up to 21. Small Things Like These was on my ballot. I love this book. It did make it to number 41 on the book reviews list, deservingly so. Claire Keegan is a powerhouse. I love her writing. This is set in Ireland. It's about a very important and not spoken about very often part of Irish history. It's small in plot, but big in impact, and that's really important. The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. The internet owes me an apology for clowning me on Twitter for saying that this book was a modern classic. In my opinion, this book has changed the lexicon. It is something that has made its way into common vernacular. If someone said to you, I volunteer as tribute, or this is Hunger Games-esque, you would know what they meant. It's a great premise, it's a great plot, and people were saying I was wrong, but it feels so good. It tastes so good to be right. Braiding Sweetgrass, I have not yet read, but this was a book I was really surprised not to see on the original list. 11/22/63 by Stephen King. I did see that Stephen King submitted one of his own books to the original list. It was not this one, which is really funny, because at least this would be so vindicating for him. He'd be like, told ya. But it wasn't this one. Maybe the other one is on here. I personally thought On Writing by Stephen King would make it onto the list, but it didn't. So there's that. Trust by Hernan Diaz. I'm desperate to read. The Nightingale by Kirsten Hanna. Cast by Isabel Wilkerson in at 51. James by Percival Everett at 50. This is so far the most recent book to find its way onto the list. Published in the last year, this has also just been longlisted for this year's Booker Prize and is the front runner. It's the favourite to win at the moment. Gone Girl, I can't believe. Oh wait, sorry. So yeah. James is a book that I want to read. Gone Girl is a book that I have read. I was really surprised not to see this one on the original list. On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. I mean, of course, again, this was something I was shocked and horrified not to see on the initial list. Ocean Vuong is an absolute legend. Have I told you guys the story about how I was at an event and I knew that Ocean Vuong was going to be there? I was at this party. I knew that Ocean Vuong was going, and I was like, all night I was thinking, I need to find Ocean Vuong. I really want to say hi to him. But how? I'm not worthy of his greatness. Even being in his aura, I'm going to just faint. And then I'm walking through on my way to the bar and someone taps my shoulder and they're like, oh, Jack, good to see you. It's Ocean Vuong. It is Ocean Vuong. I peaked in that moment. I can't believe that happened. In fact, Ocean Vuong was the one who introduced me to the team from the New York Times, who then asked me to contribute to the original list. So thank you, Ocean Vuong. And I'm glad that Ocean Vuong got his justice here. So I have read that. I've also read the next one, number 47, Lessons in Chemistry. This is another recent release. The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller was on my list because I think that it has had a huge impact on the literary landscape, on the industry. You know, right behind me is a shelf full of Greek mythological retellings, which I think have been made possible by the success of The Song of Achilles. I love the way that Madeline Miller writes. I don't think anyone else has come close yet. Yes, Tommy Orange, they're there. They're there, and The Song of Achilles were both on my ballot. I'm buzzing to see them on there. That's another book I have read. This is a really important Native American voice. Winner of the Pulitzer Prize. I cannot believe. This was the one I was most shocked. This and Normal People were the two I was most shocked not to see on the original list. So buzzing for Tommy Orange. Wandering Souls, which is a sequel of sorts, has just been longlisted for this year's Booker Prize. Hopefully this is the year that everyone starts reading Tommy Orange books, because you absolutely should. If you're not, you're missing out. This book had me like in floods of tears. Now, The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride, I know that people absolutely love. I started to read it and had to DNF because I could not get into it. I would love to give it another go. It's definitely not a book that I'm giving up on altogether. I think maybe it was just a timing thing. Yeah, I don't know. The writing style I just couldn't sink my teeth into. Between the World and Me was number 36 on the book reviews list, 43 on this one. I've read it. I loved it. So moving, so powerful. A book everyone should read before they die. Not to make it morbid, but you should. The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde was a big book on BookTube back in the day. I have not got round to reading it yet, but it was number 11 on the book reviews list and 42 on this one. So that is the 10th book that I'm like, I want to read that from this list. Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. We have another Khaled Hosseini book, The Kite Runner, at number 40, deservingly so. I have read this book, also loved it. One of the most important people writing today, Olive Kitteridge. Now, I haven't read this book by Elizabeth Strout, but I have read other books in this kind of series. Well, I read a Lucy Barton book. She has these characters who she will write about in different stages of their lives, and they're really great. So I haven't read this one, but her books are so bingeable. Elizabeth by the Sea got me completely out of a reading slump last year, so I'm not surprised to see an Elizabeth Strout book on this list. The Great Believers by Rebecca Mackay, I have read. I think it's incredible. Number 64 on the book reviews list, but up to 38 on this one. The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. I actually recently... Oh, do you want to hear this story? I went to a hotel which had a book butler service, and the whole idea was that I was going to film a video where I paid the book butler to recommend me a book, and then I would stay at the hotel and read it. And I go to the meeting with the book butler, and she didn't recommend me a book. She was like, I just feel like you've read everything, so I don't know what to recommend you. And I was like, gutted. So I ended up staying at this hotel for 2 nights for kind of no reason. Couldn't get a video out of it, so I was just randomly there for literally no... I mean, it was relaxing. It was nice. It was a nice hotel. But there was, in the end, no reason for me to be there. And then when I got home, she sent me an email being like, oh, I just realised what book you should read. It's The Nickel Boys. And I was like, you couldn't have thought of this 2 days ago. Maybe I'll make that video in the future. And if I do, you did not hear it here. But I really want to read that book. I've read The Underground Railroad, which I didn't love. And then I read Colson Whitehead's book all about Manhattan and New York. And it's so good. So I would love to give his writing another go. We can talk about my thoughts on The Underground Railroad. I mean, I have spoken about it on the internet before. It's in my Dua Lipa book club video if you're intrigued, but I just didn't think the characters were very well fleshed out. I thought the concept was amazing and very important, but I'm always surprised to see it get so much praise. The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. Well, of course, that's a book I have read. Joan Didion was at number 12 on the book reviews list. She's at 36 on this one. Deserved. She's the GOAT. Now, before we dive into the top 30, I just wanted to let you know that today's video is very, very, very kindly brought to you by Squarespace. We love Squarespace. The reason we love Squarespace is because it is the all-in-one platform for building a website or an online brand. You don't need to have expert skills in being a coder or a web developer, because Squarespace has hundreds of incredible templates that are the perfect starting point, which you can customize and make your own. This means you can bring your vision to life, whether that's starting a blog, whether that's having an email sign-up list, flexible payments for your customers, and also they have AI SEO, which basically means that all of your hard work is put to good use because it will appear on search engines. If all of this sounds good to you, then you can head to squarespace.com right now for a free trial, give it a whiz, see how it goes. And then when you're ready to launch your beautiful new website, you can use the code JackInTheBooks at squarespace.com/JackInTheBooks and get yourself 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for their continued support of this channel, and I appreciate you so much. Thank you. At number 35, we have The Covenant of Water. I'm pretty sure this was an Oprah's book club pick. I know a lot of people who have read this. It's a big, big old book. I haven't got around to it yet, but I would like to at some point. So that is going on my list of books that I would like to read. Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. I have not yet read. It's definitely on the bucket list of books I do need to get round to, especially now that it's been ranked 34 on this list and 28 on the book reviews list. So pretty consistent, actually. The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. I have read. This was another book that I said was one of my contemporary books that I think will be a classic in the future. Narrated by Death itself. It's so interesting. Cloud Cuckoo Land. No way. Cloud Cuckoo Land is number 32. I hated this book. I have read it, but I did not enjoy it. I realized though that I just don't like Anthony Doerr's writing style, because I also don't especially love All the Light We Cannot See, which I know is a really controversial take. I just didn't resonate with the writing style at all. I thought it was an okay book, but I'm always baffled to see it get so much praise as like one of the best books ever. And I think maybe that makes you feel more harshly about something, like you judge it more harshly when you feel like you're in the minority. But Cloud Cuckoo Land is cuckoo that's up there. Circe by Madeline Miller makes total sense. I have read this one. I think it's beautiful. Next we have A Visit from the Goon Squad. Can't believe I haven't read this book. I'm actually embarrassed to admit that I haven't read this book yet. Number 30 on this list, number 39 on the original one. Oh, here's Say Nothing. Wow. Okay, so Patrick Radden Keefe has 2 books on this list. This is another one that I really would like to read. Number 19 on the original list, 29 on this one. Cutting for Stone by Abraham Verghese. I have read. Normal People. Of course I've read that one. You know I've read that one. And it was on my ballot. In at number 27, very vindicating. I just think one of the most important books that's been released this century because it changed the way that people write. And it also gave a lot of writers permission to write, I guess, love stories in a literary way again, and prove that there was still an interest in that kind of thing. The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen, I have not yet read. I haven't read any Franzen, actually. Gilead, this is outrageous to me. I can't believe it was in the top 10 of the original list. I can't believe it's at 25 on this one. I hated every minute of reading that book. Bel Canto by Ann Patchett. Wow, 3 books from Ann Patchett on this list. The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson was number 2 on the original list. I know nothing about this book, but I would like to know more. Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell was on my ballot. I have read this. It is a book about Shakespeare's family. Without ever mentioning Shakespeare by name, we get to see people who have been forgotten in his story. And I think it is one of the most captivating meditations on grief I've ever read. Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. Yes, I've read that. That really belongs in the 21st spot. The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay makes sense. At 19, Americana. I totally didn't realize, and this is really stupid now that I think about it, that this was published this century. And when I saw it on the list, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I A, didn't put that on my ballot, and B, didn't include it in my video on books that I think will be modern classics in the future, because Americana is one of the best books ever. In at number 19 on this list, 27 on the original one, should have been on my ballot. Really annoyed at myself. I think because it feels so much like a classic already. I didn't even realize it was published this century. Middlesex, interesting. I have not read this one yet, but I would like to. Atonement, also haven't read yet, but really want to. Part of the Lefe book club this month. Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. I predicted this earlier. I thought this would be on here. This is it at number 16 and number 18 on the book reviews list. So very consistent. George Saunders, consistent king. At 15, The Road by Cormac McCarthy. I have a copy of this. There are certain books that you just sort of, for some reason, hold off from reading. Also, I think when there are books you feel like you have to read, that everyone is like, you have to read this at some point. I think sometimes you're like, I will get around to it at some point. I don't have this sense of urgency because it's already being revered as a kind of modern classic. I need to get around to this one. In at number 15 here, Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel in 14. There we go. The Underground Railroad in at number 13. I think it's an okay book. I think it's a great premise, but I think it's an okay book in terms of the writing and the character development, character arc. Some characters just disappear for a bit. I don't know, man. It's not even the best Colson Whitehead book. Then we have The Overstory by Richard Powers. I'm really intrigued by his new book, Playground, which is about colonizing the ocean and sending floating cities, like floating autonomous cities out into the ocean. The Overstory, I know a lot of people who have attempted this book. Some loved it. Some just couldn't get through it because it was so dense. Next up, we have A Little Life. This was on my ballot. Again, I got clowned on the internet for talking about this, but I do feel like, at least to me, it is a modern classic. My justification is everyone knows about it. Everyone talks about this book, and it's, contentious. A lot of people have opinions on it. They're also very extreme. That is what makes a book a classic book. You don't have to like all classic books. Usually they're just books that cause discussion. They cause a conversation about what we should write about, how we should explore themes like this. I happen to think this is beautifully written. I think it's a real masterpiece. I appreciate that not everyone thinks that, and that's okay. But seeing this in at number 11, I am chuffed. Okay, number 10 is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I read her other book, so I haven't read this one. Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro brings me up to 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45. One of the best twists of all time. This was number 9 on the book reviewer list and number 9 on the readers list. So for me, that's the most deserving of its placement because everyone agreed. Everyone surveyed believed this was the 9th best book of the 21st century. I think Kazuo Ishiguro can take that one. I think he's allowed that. My Brilliant Friend, which was number 1 on the book reviews list, is number 8 on this one. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin is at number 7. I think this is a good book. Surprised to see it as high up as it is. I have read this one, but this might just be a recency bias thing. like it's a book that people remember reading recently and remember enjoying recently. So, you know, you have to take those things into consideration too. 6 is Educated. I have read this. Tara Westover's account of growing up in a family who believed that the end of the world was coming and refused to educate her properly. And she went out into the world herself and she got herself an amazing education. And it is a really empowering story. Pachinko by Min Jin Lee is at number 5 on this list, number 15 overall. I have read this book. I always say I think the first third of this book is one of the best things I've ever read. And I would say the first third of this book is the 5th best thing of the century. However, I think that she kind of loses it a little bit. And by the final 5th, it's out of control and it's a mess. And she is introducing characters, then killing them off on the same page. Like, it just doesn't have that tightness and brilliance, I think, that the first third has. So seeing that complete difference, like, I hate inconsistency in a book when it feels like the first part is really well edited and the last part isn't. I find that annoying. I think this is a really special book and I would recommend it to people, but I think it does have flaws. The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt is number 4. A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles is number 3. Oh, it's good to see nice people winning. And then in at number 2, I'm going to flip the table. All the Light We Cannot See, number 2. I knew it would be high. I predicted this earlier on. If Cloud Cuckoo Land made it onto this list, then we knew All the Light We Cannot See would be on here somewhere. This was actually my prediction for what I thought people might rank as the best book of the 21st century from the critics. I'm unsurprised to see it here, but unhappy about it. And then number 1, Demon Copperhead. This was on my list, and that is very validating. This was on my ballot, and it made it to number 1 on this list, not the ballot I actually put it forward for, but it was number 61 on the book reviews list. This is a retelling of David Copperfield by Dickens. In fact, I went to a talk where Barbara Kingsolver said that Charles Dickens came to her. So she was at his house and she was looking at his writing desk and he told her to write the story, which is kind of cuckoo bananas, but I love it for her. And it did win the Women's Prize and it has just been named number 1 on the Reader's Choice list. So fair play. You can say whatever you want at that point. Oh, and it won the Pulitzer. You know, when you can forget an achievement like that in its list of achievements because there are just so many, that's a sign of a great book. But the character is so believable. He just jumps off the page because every line is written like it came straight from his brain. So brilliant. I do think that this is number 1 as a result of a bit of recency bias, but it is a really spectacular book and I do think it belongs at least in the top 10. So this is the list. Those were the top 100 best books of the 21st century according to readers. And the answer to my question of how many of these have I read is I have read 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 51. Okay, just over half. I'm okay with that. I'm happy with that. There's a lot on here that I still want to read. Specifically, there are 11 books on here that I'm desperate to read, which will be bumped up my TBR, and I'm going to try and read them before the year is up. Which says to me, I've got a great year of reading ahead of me. I'm chuffed with that. I'm happy with that. That's a good day at the office. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know how many you have read in the comment section down below and how many of them you would like to read. Until next time, all the best. Stay in touch. Have a wonderful day and I'll catch you very soon. Bye-bye.